For the past few weeks, we have been, thank you so much, talking about the book, The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr, who is a Franciscan monk, a priest, and we have just been loving this book. This book for us really brings what we believe into just a much clearer, it defines it so much more clearly, but he's really bringing the Bible in a way, to me, as to what it was intended to mean, what it was intended to say. And it's so incredibly beautiful. What I do hope is that for those of you who have been here the last few weeks, that you really have been moving into that meditation and that contemplation, moving beyond the intellectual aspect of I know the concept of the Christ into the place of being able to say, I am the Christ. And to know that the Christ is our spiritual DNA. And the Christ really, when it comes down to it, it's God, it's love, it's goodness, it's every quality that we would give to this energy that we call God, is the Christ. But we are that, and we have that opportunity to expand that in ourselves and to live more fully from that in our daily lives. And that is how we're going to change the world, really, is by expressing that in a bigger way, in a grander way, in a more beautiful way in our daily lives. I was thinking about an acorn, and that the acorn is really the housing for the mighty oak tree, but that in the right environment, the acorn is going to break away so that that mighty oak can grow into what it was created to be. And it made me think of the story of John the Baptist when he was with the other disciples and they were looking across at Jesus as Jesus was baptizing, and John the Baptist said, he must increase and I must decrease. So let's look for a minute at what Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, says from the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. The Metaphysical Bible Dictionary is his interpretation of all the events, of all the places and all the people in the Bible. He says John the Baptist represents a high intellectual perception of truth, but not yet one quickened by spirit. He goes on to say, let me turn this on and it will work, that the intellect is to prepare the way for the spiritual consciousness, the Christ. When the quickening by spirit takes place in consciousness, to the extent that the Christ is realized, it becomes alive in us and felt and known, one depends on inspiration of spirit rather than on the reasonings of the intellectual man. So it's really saying that the ego part of me must decrease in order that the real part of me, what we call the Christ, can increase. And there's a number of ways that this ego part of us decreases. It's called the quickening. How we create, or the right environment is created for us. As I've said, one is through meditation and contemplation, through journaling, through art, through being out in nature, wherever it is that you can feel that there's something greater than just, us. Another is in just being in service, that we are called to be in service. And another way, you guys, is through fire, is through transformation. How many of us have had kind of fiery transformational experiences in our lives? How many of us have had more than one? It's a normal, natural part of our experience. So, as we look at everything that feels like it's in disarray in our country and in the world today, sometimes we probably do sit back and ask, where is this going? What is happening? Is this really going someplace good? And, when we look around and we see homelessness, we see addiction, school shootings, police brutality, climate change, immigration issues, inequality, white supremacy, and the huge chasm of the American people, is this going somewhere good? And I want to tell you, yes, it is going somewhere good. got to hang on, and we have to suit up and we have to show up, because we are participants in this, helping it to go somewhere good. And it's recognizing that right now we're going through a huge fire, aren't we? We're going through some massive changes. There's a lot that's coming up and a lot that's coming out. And ours is to hold on and to know that, we know that fire is transformative. We know that when, a forest fire happens, there's so much good that comes out of a forest fire. It creates the right environment for native plants to come forth. The things that are left that have been burnt create habitats for animals. There's just so much good that comes out of that. So recognizing that fire is, what we're talking about today is fire equals change, it equals transformation, it really equals the opportunity for what we would call the resurrection, what we would call the rebirth, the renewal. And the thing is doggone it, we just don't have one crucifixion and resurrection experience in our life, do we? We have numerous opportunities for this. So when going back to Richard Rohr in the book, The Universal Christ, he shares that the first public word that Jesus shared out of his mouth was the Greek imperative verb metanoia, which literally translates as simply change your mind or go beyond your mind. This is out of Matthew. The word we would call metanoia simply means a change of mind, a change of heart. But what happened, and this is one of the things that I love about his book, is because he tells us the facts about the progression of Christianity and how things came to be what they are today, and that they're not necessarily the truth of what things are. He says, unfortunately, in the 4th century, St. Jerome translated the word into Latin as whatever that Latin word is, which means to repent or to do penance. Very different from what the original word is, change of heart, change of mind, into repent or do penance. And what happened with that was that misunderstanding contributed to a really puritanical and externalized aspect of Christianity, where the message became about external requirements that we then had reward and punishment for, much more than an actual change of heart. And an actual change of mind. Jesus always made his message about interior change and the purity of the heart. That's what his message was about. It wasn't about all these rules and regulations. It was about this beautiful change that we have the opportunity to experience. Richard says this inner process of change is fundamental to everything, even to our bodies. Think about when something goes wrong with our body, we have to just kind of relax into that and allow the internal healing. So it's this beautiful internal process that we get to go to. He said the Christ portrays suffering and resurrection, darkness and light. And it's interesting because I think a lot of times in New Thought, we want to push those things away. We want to do a spiritual bypass, put a happy face on everything that happens and call it all good. And what I love about where he goes and another thing I'm going to share with you today is how important it is to honor these experiences that we have in our life, because these experiences actually give us that opportunity to transcend the ego and, again, to have more of who we really are be what comes into the light. He shares that many of us have failed to honor God's always unfolding future and the process of getting there, which usually requires some form of dying to the old. And he says the great irony is that we have often done this in the name of praying to God as though God would protect us from the very process that refines us. It's alchemy. We please don't let this happen. Please take me out of this, when in actuality, these are the very things that are growing us. These are the very things that are refining us. He says God keeps creation both good and new, which always means we are going somewhere better, even when it seems to the contrary. That we can trust that all of this that is coming up, all of this that is unfolding, that it is going somewhere good, and that great good. And a ginormous good is going to come out of all of this. And I can tell you, I'm already seeing that there's great good that is coming out of this. And he said the helpful word that we have to keep in mind here is evolution. And he said evolution and evolutionists and creationists don't have to be enemies, that the evolutionists rightly want to say that the universe is unfolding, and the creationists rightly want to say that there is a purpose or a meaning to the unfoldment. And I love that because it brings it together. So he says the risen Christ, who appears in the middle of history, assures us that God is leading us somewhere good and positive. God has been leading us since the beginning of time, but now God is including us in this unfoldment. When in Romans it says, and we know in all things God works for the good of those who love him and are called to his purpose. Now we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes, but recognize here that this takes us into action, that we are participants in the unfolding of the greater good, that you and I, it's important that we're showing up in this unfoldment of the greater good. He says that we don't have to be afraid of the depths and breadths of our own lives, of what this world offers or asks of us, that we are given permission to be intimate with our own experiences, to learn from them, and allow ourselves to descend to the depth of things, even mistakes, before we too quickly try to transcend it all in the name of some idealized purity or superiority. And what I want to say here is, again, I think that so many times in New Thought, we want to put that Band-Aid on something and not allow ourselves to feel the very real feelings that we feel when we are experiencing these fires. I know that when my husband unexpectedly died, I went to the depths of those feelings. And you know, when we're in these things, we want to do everything we can to push that away, right? Because we don't want to feel the pain. How's that work? We still feel it. And the reality is, when we allow ourselves to be in that, when we allow ourselves to feel what that is, it actually does move us through it quicker than when we keep denying that it's there. And he's saying it's important for us to actually feel that, to actually have that experience. He says God hides in the depths and is not seen as long as we stay on the surface of anything. Why? Because we're usually in our ego. We're usually in our heads. You know, and I loved one day, Dee was talking to me in the office and saying, I really love that you're talking about the Christ. You cannot talk about the Christ too much, that we are that, because how many times a day are we in that awareness? Even with how much we're immersed in this, how much of our day are we actually in that awareness? And so we want to live in that awareness more often. But I love what he says here. Let me go back. That great love and great suffering, both healing and woundedness, are the universal, always available paths of transformation, because, love this, they are the only things strong enough to take away the ego's protections and pretensions. Because what happens when we hit those places? We surrender. We recognize the ego can't do it for us. And in those times that we feel broken and broken open, those are those times, you guys, that we're open to something more. Those are those times that we've moved beyond that ego, and we're willing to be renewed. We're willing to be filled with something that we know is there. We can't define it, but we absolutely know that is there. And he says, great love and great suffering bring us back to God. It's a normal part of our human experience. And the idea here today is to help us to not think of those as being bad or making them bad or wrong, but being able ultimately to embrace them and know that they're leading us someplace good. So this past week, well, actually a couple weeks ago, we were watching Oprah, again, Super Soul Sunday, and she had this woman on, and her name is Dr. Edith Eva eager. And she wrote a book called The Choice. I read this entire book this week. Now, she wrote this book at 90 years old. She is now 91 years old. She and her family grew up in a rather normal environment. Her dad was a tailor. Her mom was a stay-at-home mom. One of her older sisters was a concert violinist. One was a concert pianist. And Edith herself had taken ballet and had even been training toward the Olympics. They really had a life that was full of hope for the future, until one day when the Nazis came. And one of her sisters was away in Budapest, but they got the rest of the family. They put them on a cattle train, and they took them to Auschwitz. Now, I have never read any personal experiences of the Holocaust, and I was so taken with this book and her journey, and honestly, with the incredible inhumanities that happened during the Holocaust. She tells a story, and I'm not going to share a lot of that with you because I don't want to depress you, but she does tell the story of walking with her two sisters, with her both she and her sister, and her mom was in the middle, and they were walking to what is called, the guy Mengele is called the angel of death. And when they got up there, and he looked at them and he said, "Is this your mother or your sister?" And she was 16, in crazy situation, and she said, "This is my mother." And he sent her mother to the left, to the gas chamber, and she and her sister miraculously survived this year-long ordeal, but both of her parents were ultimately sent to the gas chamber. They endured incredibly grueling experiences at these camps, and but I will tell you that the inhumanities were an atrocity to life itself. It's unbelievable to me that this could ever have happened, and that somehow it's just unbelievable. So after a year of absolute terrorism, here was the thing. 18,000 of these people were sent to this camp to die, and they were literally just laying one on top of the other, and people would die underneath them, people would die on top of them. When the GIs came, when the Day of Freedom came, she was 70 pounds. She's at this point 17 years old. She was 70 pounds. She had a broken back, didn't know she had a broken back. She had typhoid. She had sores all over, had not eaten, and she's under 2 bodies. And the GI says, "Raise your hand if you're alive." And she has nothing in her to raise her hand, and neither does her sister. And they start to walk away, but her sister had been given a can of sardines a few weeks before, which was almost cruel because there was nothing to open the can with. But there were incredible miracles along the way, and this was one of those. She held on to that can of sardines, and she was able to maneuver that can in a way that the light shone on it, and the soldiers came back. And she mustered everything in herself to raise her hand, and the soldiers literally had to take 2 bodies off of her to get her. Now, this was a horrible, horrible, horrible experience, and just beyond anything we could even begin to imagine. And she was silent about this for 20 years. Her thinking was, if I hold the secret, it won't affect me. I'm just going to go ahead and live my life. She got married. They came to America not knowing any English at all. They had 3 children, 2 children. She went on to get a master's and eventually got her doctorate, and became a world-renowned psychologist. And she has helped hundreds of thousands of people throughout the time, using her experience, using the tools that she learned in order to move through these experiences, but to transcend and to use them for the greater good. Here's one of the things that she talked about with using, because remember her mom said, only you can do what's in your mind. Only you can put what's in your mind. And she said that at one point, this angel of death, that guy came in, and he chose her to dance for him. And she was a ballerina, and she had this whole, she'd been rehearsing the Blue Danube, and that was the song that he chose. And she said, I just went into my mind, and I imagined that I was in a theater, and there was an audience, and I danced that Blue Danube. And that's how she got through this this entire year was using the power of her imagination. She said she and the others who were in the camps with her would say, I'm good, I'm innocent, somehow something good will come of this. Can you imagine that? Somehow something good will come of this. And her mantra was, if I survive today, tomorrow I will be free. And that's how she got through this crazy year. So I share this with you because, and here's one of the things she says, nobody's suffering is any more or less than anybody else's, because she would have people come to see her and they would say, my experience was nothing like yours. And she would say, it doesn't matter, because we all have this suffering. And what she believes to be important is that we acknowledge that we have had these experiences, because we can't just pretend like they didn't happen, because they're going to affect us. She said that one of the people asked her, aren't you angry at God? And I love this so much, because she said, no, God didn't do this. People did it. And I think that was probably a great saving grace for her, was that she didn't have this anger at something outside of her. So some of her words of wisdom. She says, freedom lies in learning to embrace what happened. A conventional wisdom says that if something bothers you or causes you anxiety, just don't look at it. Don't dwell on it. Don't go there. So we run from past traumas and hardships, or from current discomfort or conflict. And for much of her adulthood, she did feel that her survival depended on keeping the past in its past and the darkness locked away. And what she learned was that when we force our truths and our stories into hiding, secrets become their own trauma, their own prison. And far from diminishing pain, they actually, and when we deny ourselves to accept, they become as inescapable as brick walls and steel bars. And so she is all about, making sure that we're not holding these secrets. And here's the thing, you guys, if something happened to us, what I want to say, it's not your fault. It happened to you. And I think a lot of times we don't share things because we carry this guilt and this shame. And yet you didn't do anything wrong. And the only way to really move beyond that is to talk to somebody about it, is to get it outside of yourself. She said that bad things happen to everyone, suffering is universal, but victimhood is optional. And I love this. There's a difference between victimization and victimhood. No one can make you a victim except you. We become victims not because of what happens to us, but when we choose to hold on to our victimization. We developed a victim's mind, a way of thinking and being that is rigid, blaming, pessimistic, stuck in the past, unforgiving, punitive. We become our own jailers. And so her goal is, she said, we all have these concentration camps of our own consciousness. And she works so hard to help free us from these prisons of our own mind. And now here's the thing she says too. She is not blaming victims. There's victimhood and there's victimization. And she said victimizers need to be called out. It's important to assign blame to the perpetrators. Nothing is gained if we close our eyes to the wrong, if we give someone a pass, if we dismiss accountability. But she said, as her fellow travelers taught her, you can live life to avenge the past, or you can live life to enrich the future. Which feels better? We can live life to enrich the future. And that's really where we all want to be, no matter what has happened to us in our lives, that we can know that we can rise up out of that, and we can truly have the life that we desire. It doesn't negate the past. It doesn't erase the past. And I know for her, even at 91 years old, the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress syndrome, is still active in her. When she hears sirens, it immediately comes back. But she's learned tools in order that she doesn't live in that consciousness anymore. And that's really so much of what this is about today, is recognizing that we all have that ability within us to be able to move above and beyond. But if we feel that we are being stuck in some old patterns, probably we need to take a look at some of our past stuff. And I know there's that school of thought, no, I don't want to go dig that up. But I'm telling you, if you're repeating patterns, something needs to be looked at. Something needs to be healed. And so many times, just having someone sit with you and acknowledge what happened and be able to help you move through that will change the trajectory of your life, because you will be able to finally be free of it. She said that she sat in an airport one day and just watched people. And she said she was so shocked because what she saw were people that were bored and people with fury and tension, worry, confusion, discouragement, disappointment, sadness, and most troubling, emptiness. And she said that, even the dullest moments of our lives are still an opportunity for buoyancy and happiness. And if we feel that we're in those places a lot, it's something we should probably look at. Because I can tell you right now, if you look around in this room, every single one of us has experienced some pretty crappy stuff. Every single one of us has. Not one of us has escaped that. And the difference with moving into a greater experience of life is, am I holding it as a secret? Am I holding it as something that I feel that I've done something wrong? I'm ashamed of what happened. And, that usually comes with some type of abuse as a child, that we hold that, things like that. And I want to tell you again, it's not your fault, and you have no reason to hold that. So ultimately, as we look at this, what we want to recognize is that Denise Rosier yesterday, I loved it. She said that what she likes to do is she likes to go back 5 years, and she looks at like maybe something that happened that was a really awful thing at the time. And then she likes to tell the story of where that thing has brought her. And how that helps her is that when something kind of shows up in her life today, she looks and she said, I wonder what story I'm going to tell about the transformation because of this experience. What a difference in how we would deal with experiences in our lives. Because you know what? Life happens, doesn't it? We aren't in control of everything that happens in our lives and in the lives of those around us. Life happens, and we have wonderful tools. So one of the things that I want to say to you is we do live in a participatory universe, that when it's, all things work together for those who love God and are called to his purpose. What that means is that when we love God, we are being in service to love. We are willing to be the qualities that God is, and that we are taking action. That it's not just about, and it's important that we're doing the consciousness stuff, but we've also got to take action to help move our country, our world, to the greater good that we know is coming out of this. The other thing I want to say on a personal level, that if this brings stuff up for you, number one, seek counseling. Get a counselor. Find somebody who can help you to deal with this. I am not a professional counselor. I am a spiritual counselor. I am happy to sit with anyone and talk about things, but I am not a professional counselor. I encourage you to do that. At the very least, find somebody that you can trust and talk about it. And get that outside of yourself so it's no longer something that is inside of you. So many times, all we need is to be acknowledged for our pain. When somebody just says, I see you, and that really sucked, and that was wrong. That so many times is enough to move somebody to a different place. From a bigger level, what I want to encourage us to do to move this towards that greater good that we know it's going to is, in your times of meditation and contemplation, focus on what this world can look like when it's working for everyone. Focus on seeing hearts opening with that love, that it's not just about our hearts opening, but to see the hearts of our leaders, of our cities and our states and our country and the world, see those hearts opening up. And the last thing, of course, is to take action. Because it's not enough for us to know the truth, you guys. We must live, we must take action on the truths that we know. And sometimes that's going to call us into some higher ways of being and standing for what we know to be right and what we know to be true and what we know to be good. So I know this is a little heavy today, but we have to talk about this because we can no longer keep these secrets. We can no longer say that, oh, life is la la la, good all the time, because the reality is we have experiences in life that don't feel good. Yes? Yeah. And we need to be able to talk about that. We need to be able to share those with each other. And then we can share how we have transcended those, and how we can share our stories of how 5 years ago, this is what happened. And today, because of this is where I'm at. And that gives all of us hope, doesn't it? Yes.